The translator was already smoking when Commander Dale Corey slammed it against the wall of the Scifi diplomatic shuttle. Not smoking like burning. Smoking like it had given up on life. A thin gray curl rising from the speaker grill, and the little red light on the side, blinking the universal language of broken hardware. The Scifi ambassador, whose name was something close to Viel Shin, but with a click in the middle that human throats could not produce, stood 6 feet away, watching him with her 4 pale eyes arranged in a square on her face. She was tall. Taller than Dale by a full head. Her skin was the color of old pewter, and she wore robes the color of deep water. She had been studying Earth culture for 11 months in preparation for this first official diplomatic visit. She had files. She had notes. She had a dedicated research team back on her homeworld who had combed through 2 decades of human digital archives. She was prepared. She was not prepared for Dale Corey. Dale was not a diplomat. He wanted to be very clear about that. He was an engineering crew chief on the joint Human-Scifi orbital station project. And the only reason he was in this shuttle was because the actual diplomat, a very polished woman named Carol Brand, had come down with a severe respiratory infection 3 hours ago and was currently horizontal in the medical bay, making sounds that no polished diplomat should ever make in public. The station director had looked around the room in desperation and pointed at Dale because Dale spoke the most Scifi words of anyone available, which was exactly 14 words, 3 of which were numbers, and 1 of which was a curse he had learned from a Scifi cargo technician during a very long loading shift. So here Dale was, representing humanity, with a broken translator, in front of an ambassador who had spent 11 months studying Earth to prepare for this moment. Viel Shin tilted her head. The gesture meant confusion in Scifi body language, which Dale had been told but promptly forgotten. He read it as polite waiting. He picked up the translator, shook it the way humans shake everything that stops working, and set it down again. The red light blinked. The smoke continued its philosophical ascent. Viel Shin spoke. Her voice was layered, like 2 people talking in harmony, but not quite in sync. The sounds were liquid and consonant at the same time, words that felt like water being poured over smooth stones. Dale understood none of it. He held up 1 finger in the universal human sign for "please wait." Viel Shin tilted her head the other direction. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small personal comm unit, pulled up the emergency translation app that the station had loaded on all crew devices, and held it up between them like a peace offering. The app was not the same quality as the professional translator. The professional translator had been a piece of equipment that cost more than Dale earned in 2 years. The app was free. It had 3 stars. 1 reviewer had written, "It translated my grocery list into what appears to be a threat." Dale pointed to himself. He said his name slowly. Dale Corey, Crew Chief, Engineering. The app processed, and it played back something in Scifi. Viel Shin's 4 eyes widened slightly and then settled. She pointed to herself and said her name, the full version with the click, and then a shorter version, Viel, for his convenience. Dale nodded. Viel, he could do that. They stood in the middle of the shuttle corridor, 2 people separated by approximately 400 years of technological and biological evolution, with a dying translator on the floor between them and a 3-star app as their only bridge. Viel reached into the folds of her robe and produced a data tablet. She tapped it twice. Text appeared on the screen in English, slightly stiff but readable. She had prepared backup communication methods. Of course she had. She turned the tablet toward him. It said, "I have studied your people. I am ready to learn and to share. Please tell me how you prefer to conduct informal cultural exchange." Dale read it. He said, honestly and without thinking, whatever works for you. I am just the guy they found on short notice. He said this into the app and it translated. Vielle looked at the app output on her own earpiece for a long moment. Then something happened in her face that Dale could not interpret. Her secondary eyelids, the thin translucent ones that Scifi had in addition to their regular ones, slid halfway across her eyes and then slid back. Her mouth, which was wide and thin, pressed together and then relaxed. She typed something new on her tablet and showed it to him. It said, "You are not a professional diplomat." Dale said, "No, not even a little bit." She typed, "The actual diplomat is unavailable." Dale said, "She is horizontal and making sounds." Vielle absorbed this. She typed, "And they sent you." Dale spread his hands in the human gesture of, "What can you do?" Vielle watched the gesture with all 4 eyes. She filed it in her memory next to 47 other human gestures she had cataloged. She typed, "Then we will manage together." Dale looked at her. She looked at him. The broken translator sat on the floor between them, still smoking faintly. He said, "I think we can do that." The app translated it. Vielle's secondary eyelids did the thing again. Dale would later learn that was Scifi laughter. They had no idea what was coming. The station had assigned Dale a small meeting room with a round table, 2 chairs modified for Scifi proportions, a coffee machine, mirror, and a fruit platter that someone had assembled by reading a document titled Foods Considered Welcoming Across Earth Cultures, which had produced a bowl containing 3 types of melon, a small bunch of grapes, and 1 extremely lonely pomegranate. Dale looked at the platter when they arrived and thought it looked like someone had tried to build a diplomatic relationship out of fruit and given up halfway. Vielle sat across from him, her long fingers folded on the table. She had her data tablet out. She had a secondary device that appeared to be a recording instrument. She had a small printed booklet with handwritten notes in Scifi script in the margins. She was, Dale realized, genuinely excited. It was in the way she sat, slightly forward, the way her secondary eyelids flickered every time she looked around the room. She had been waiting for this for 11 months, and she was going to make the most of it, even if the human across from her was a crew chief who had 14 words of Zivari and a 3-star translation app. Dale poured coffee. He offered her some. She declined with a gesture he interpreted correctly as "no thank you." She pulled a flask from her robe and set it on the table. It contained a Scifi beverage that looked like water, but shifted color slightly when it moved, cycling through pale blue and pale green in a slow loop. They looked at each other. Vielle opened her booklet to a marked page and turned it so Dale could see. It was a list, written in English, carefully, in small, neat handwriting. At the top it said, "Topics for Cultural Exchange, Informal Session, Priority 1. Dale leaned forward and read it. The list included Earth greeting customs, family structures, the meaning of common Earth idioms, traditional human activities, and at the bottom, starred twice, human concepts of play and recreation. Dale tapped the starred item. He said, "You want to talk about how humans play?" She nodded. Zivari nodding meant the same as human nodding. That had been one of the early nice surprises of first contact. She typed on her tablet. Our researchers found this area most confusing. Humans appear to engage in activities with no practical purpose solely for the experience of doing them. This concept does not exist on Zivari in the same form. We have arts, we have ceremony. But what you call play, especially for adults, is a cultural concept we do not fully understand. Dale read it. He said, "Yeah, like we do a lot of things for no reason, except that they feel good or they are funny." He said this into the app. The translation played. Vial's secondary eyelids flickered. She typed, "This is what we most want to understand. Can you give me examples?" Dale leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about all the things he could say. Board games, hiking, watching sports, cooking for pleasure, singing badly in the car. He thought about how to explain any of these things to someone for whom the concept of doing something purely because it was fun was essentially a foreign philosophy. He said, "Okay, let me start with something simple." He reached across the table and picked up the lonely pomegranate. He said, "Have you ever opened one of these?" She looked at it with all four eyes. She typed, "No." "Is it significant?" Dale said, "It is not significant at all. But it takes a while, and there are a lot of small pieces, and when you are done, you feel like you accomplished something, even though the thing you accomplished was just opening a fruit." The app translated. Vial stared at the pomegranate for 3 seconds. She typed, "You find meaning in difficulty with no productive outcome." Dale pointed at her and said, "Exactly. Now you are getting it." She picked up the pomegranate. She turned it in her long fingers. She looked at it like it contained a secret she intended to extract. Dale smiled. This, he thought, was going to be interesting. They spent 40 minutes on the pomegranate. Vial was meticulous. She broke it apart with more care than Dale had ever applied to the task, separating each small red seed with her long fingers onto a piece of cloth she had spread on the table. She arranged them in a pattern. Dale watched her and said nothing. She was making something, he realized. She was turning the act of opening fruit into a kind of art because her brain did not have a category for purposeless action and had automatically redirected the activity into something structured. He did not tell her she was doing it wrong. There was no wrong. When she finished, she looked at the pattern she had made and then looked at him. She typed, "I understand why this is satisfying, but I think I did it differently than you intended." Dale said, "There is no intended. That is the point." She read the translation twice. The secondary eyelids moved slowly. It was the longest Divari laugh he had seen from her yet. She wrote something new in her booklet. She underlined it twice. Dale tried to read it upside down, but the Guy Vere script looked like a river running sideways. She turned to the next marked page. It said at the top, "Human idioms, common usage." Dale looked at the list below it. He looked at the first item on the list. He looked at Vial. She looked at him with all four eyes. Pen ready, research face fully activated, 11 months of preparation behind her, and a profound sincerity that he was not sure he deserved to be on the receiving end of. The first item on the list said, "Please explain the phrase doggy style." Dale set down his coffee cup very carefully. Vial had found the phrase in a document titled Informal American English Expressions and Their Cultural Origins, which had been compiled by a Zyvari linguistic researcher named Porus 10, who had spent 3 years analyzing human internet text and was deeply proud of the resulting index. It was 300 pages long. It had footnotes. It had been peer-reviewed by 6 Zyvari linguists, none of whom had ever spoken to a human being in person. The entry for doggy style read, "A common American informal phrase used to describe an activity performed in the manner of a dog, often used in recreational or informal context, associated with human concepts of play and informality. See also, cultural animal mimicry in human recreation. See also, cultural animal mimicry." That was how it had been filed. Under play, under recreation, under the broad category of things humans did for fun with no productive outcome. Yeah, because to Porus 10 and the 6 peer reviewers, who had all processed the phrase through the lens of a species that did not share beds or floors or lives with animals in any casual domestic way, and who had cross-referenced it with other phrases like playing like a dog and dog-tired and you old dog, the most logical interpretation was that it referred to some form of physical activity or game that mimicked the behavior of a dog. Vielle had starred it twice because her research team had flagged animal mimicry in human recreation as a particularly interesting cultural phenomenon with no Scifi parallel. Humans apparently pretended to be animals for fun. They did this in games, in celebrations, in costumes. One of her other flagged entries was something called the chicken dance, which her team had catalogued with great scientific interest. So the phrase had been filed, starred, and brought to this table, to this room, to this moment, between this Scifi ambassador who had prepared for 11 months and this human crew chief who had not prepared at all. Dale stared at the list. Vielle watched him with the calm patience of someone who had waited 11 months already and could wait another 30 seconds. Dale picked up his coffee cup and then set it back down without drinking from it. He said, "Into the app." Slowly, "Can you tell me where you found that phrase?" The translation played. Vielle consulted her notes. She turned the booklet and pointed to a line of Scifi text that Dale could not read. She typed on her tablet. It was in a comprehensive index of American informal English, compiled from internet text sources. It was filed under Human Recreational Activity, your Animal Mimicry category. Dale read it. He read it again. He thought about Porus 10, whoever Porus 10 was, somewhere on a Scifi homeworld, reading through 3 years of human internet text and arriving at this phrase and thinking, logically and reasonably and with full academic sincerity, that it meant pretending to be a dog. He thought about the 6 peer reviewers who had nodded and signed off on this. He thought about the footnotes. He put both hands flat on the table. He said carefully, "The phrase does not mean what your research team thinks it means." The app translated. Vielle tilted her head. She wrote something in her booklet. She typed, "The meaning is incorrect in the index." Dale said, "The meaning is very different from what is in the index." Vielle looked at the entry again. On her she typed, "Our researcher cross-referenced it with several other animal-related phrases and concluded that human informal language frequently uses animal behavior as a reference point for recreational activity." Dale said, "That is true. That part is true. But this specific phrase does not refer to recreation in the way your team thought." Vielle set down her pen. She gave the entry her full 4-eyed attention. Then she looked at Dale. She typed, "What does it refer to?" Dale was a crew chief. He had spent 15 years working in environments where clear communication meant the difference between a smooth operation and someone getting hurt. He valued precision. He valued honesty. He was not a man who danced around things. He was also, in this moment, acutely aware that he was a crew chief who had been handed the job of representing humanity to an alien ambassador, and that what he said next would become part of the official record of first contact. He thought about Carol Brand, horizontal in the medical bay, making sounds. He thought about the 3-star translation app. He thought about the 6 Scifi peer reviewers who had filed this under animal mimicry. He said, "It is a phrase that refers to a specific way adults position themselves during physical intimacy." He said this into the app and watched the translation play into Vielle's earpiece. Vielle did not move. Her secondary eyelids did not flicker. All 4 of her primary eyes were completely still. Dale watched her process this information the way a man watches a very complicated machine begin a very long calculation. She looked at the phrase in her booklet. She looked at Dale. She looked at the phrase again. She reached over and picked up her flask and took a long, slow drink of the color-shifting liquid. She set it down. She typed slowly, with great precision. This phrase has been in our cultural exchange curriculum for 8 months. Dale said yes. She typed, it has been presented to 14 Scifi diplomatic trainees as an example of human recreational activity. Dale said, I am so sorry. She typed, one of our senior researchers presented it to a symposium on human cultural practices as an example of animal mimicry in informal American English. Dale pressed his lips together. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vial sat very still. Her long fingers were flat on the table. Her color-shifting flask was in front of her, and her outside the small window of the meeting room. The orbital station continued turning slowly against the black, indifferent to the cultural catastrophe currently unfolding over a pomegranate and a fruit platter and a booklet full of careful notes. She typed, the symposium proceedings were published. Dale said, how many people read them? She typed, approximately 4,000 Scifi researchers, diplomats, and students in the field of human cultural studies. Dale thought about 4,000 Scifi scholars who now believe that when humans said doggy style, they meant a recreational activity involving animal imitation. He thought about the implications of this. All the study groups, all the lecture notes, all the polite questions that had probably been asked in classrooms on a Scifi homeworld about what specifically the dog was doing and whether humans also performed cat style and bird style, and whether this was related to the human tradition of dressing in animal costumes. Something very complicated was happening behind his eyes. Vial picked up her pen. She crossed out the entry in her booklet with one long, careful line. She typed, how many other entries in our index are similarly incorrect? Dale said, I do not know, but I think we should go through the list. She turned the booklet to the next flagged page. Dale looked at the top of the page. He looked at Vial. He thought, this is going to be a very long afternoon. She had titled the section, Common American English Phrases Related to Physical Activity, and there were 27 entries. Dale picked up his coffee and drank the whole cup. He said, okay, let us start at the top. Entry 1 was, getting a leg up. Dale exhaled. He said, that one is fine. That one actually means what you probably think it means. Vial made a note. She looked visibly relieved. Entry 2 was, getting down to business. Dale said, also fine. Entry 3 was, going to town. Dale paused. He said, that one is complicated. It depends entirely on the sentence. Vial underlined it. Entry 4 was, bumping uglies. Dale set his empty cup down. He looked at the ceiling. He said, I am going to need more coffee. Vial watched him walk to the coffee machine. She looked at the entry in her booklet. She looked at the definition her research team had provided, and which read, a colloquial expression suggesting an informal and energetic physical activity, possibly related to contact sports or rough recreational play. She thought about the symposium proceedings. She wrote in the margin of her booklet, in small, careful Scifi script, verify everything. She underlined it twice. Across the room, Dale poured coffee and thought about Carol Brand in the medical bay, and how he was going to have to write a report about this, and how no training course had prepared him for any of the things that were happening in this room. He came back to the table. He sat down. Vial had her pen ready. She had all 4 eyes on him. She had 11 months of preparation and a booklet full of notes and the kind of focused attention that made Dale feel like he was a phenomenon being carefully documented by science. He said, okay, let us go through this properly. She nodded. He said, everything your team filed under animal mimicry, I need you to put a question mark next to all of it. We are going to review every single one. She looked at the section tab labeled Animal Mimicry and Behavior References. It had 31 entries. She turned to it. Dale looked at the first entry. It was riding dirty. He took a long, slow breath. He said, "Your research team thought this one meant riding an animal that was covered in mud." She checked her notes. She looked up. She typed, "Yes." Our researcher noted that rural American culture has a strong relationship with horses and working animals. Dale said, "That is true. That is genuinely true. But this phrase does not mean that." Vielle crossed it out. Dale spent the next hour and 40 minutes going through every flagged entry in the animal mimicry section. Some of them were accurate. Getting one's ducks in a row was filed correctly. Letting the cat out of the bag was filed correctly. Working like a dog was filed correctly, though the note in the margin said humans apparently admire dogs for their labor ethic, which is culturally significant. And Dale decided to leave that note alone because it was both wrong and also kind of beautiful. But the others, the ones that were not about ducks or cats or working dogs, there were 11 of them. Dale got through all 11. Vielle crossed out or modified 11 entries in her booklet with one careful line each. She was methodical. She wrote the correct meaning in the margin in small Scifi script. She did not express distress. She did not express embarrassment. She processed each correction with the same focused attention she had given the pomegranate, taking it apart piece by piece, rearranging the pieces into something that made sense. Dale respected this about her enormously. When they finished, she set her pen down and looked at her booklet. She typed, "How did our researchers arrive at these interpretations?" Dale said, "They read the phrases without context and made logical deductions based on the words themselves." She typed, "The words themselves suggested animal behavior." Dale said, "The words themselves are extremely misleading if you take them literally." She typed, "Human language is frequently not literal." Dale said, "Human language is almost never literal when it is informal." She sat with this for a moment. She looked at the booklet. She looked at Dale. She typed, "This seems like a significant structural problem for cross-cultural communication." Dale said, "Welcome to the experience of every translator who has ever existed." She read the translation. The secondary eyelids moved, slow, long. He was getting better at reading her. That was the long Scifi laugh, the one that carried something underneath it, not just amusement, but recognition. The laugh that meant, "I understand this more than I expected to." She opened a new page in her booklet. She wrote something at the top. She turned it to show him. It said in English, carefully printed, "Informal English, a field that requires direct human guidance, not solvable by text analysis alone." Dale read it. He said, "That is the most accurate thing anyone has said about informal English in a very long time." She wrote it down. She underlined it. She drew a small box around it. Dale looked at the table, at the pomegranate seeds arranged in their pattern, at the empty coffee cups, at the booklet full of careful notes and careful crossouts. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. He said, "When you came in today, before the translator broke, what did you think this meeting was going to be?" She thought about this. She typed, "I thought I was prepared. I had studied extensively. I thought the preparation would be sufficient." Dale said, "And now?" She looked at her booklet. She looked at the 11 crossed-out entries. She looked at the pomegranate seeds. She typed, "I think preparation is the beginning of learning, not the end of it." She paused. She typed one more line. And she typed, "I also think your people are significantly more complicated than our research suggested." Dale laughed. An actual laugh, the kind that came out before he could decide whether to let it. Vial watched it happen with all four eyes. She added one more line. She typed, "I mean this is a compliment." Dale said, "I know." He looked at the list. There was still one more flagged section. It was labeled American Expressions Related to Emotional Intimacy and Social Bonding. It had 22 entries. Dale looked at the section tab. He looked at Vial, who had her pen ready and all four eyes on him, and the particular expression of someone who had just learned that the ground was less solid than they thought and had decided to keep walking anyway. He said, "Okay." He said, "This next section." He said, "I think we are going to need the rest of the afternoon." She turned to the page. He looked at entry 1. It was Friends with Benefits. He reached for the coffee machine again. The report Dale Corey filed at the end of the first contact cultural exchange session was 11 pages long. It was reviewed by the station director, 2 senior diplomats, a cultural liaison officer, and eventually by Carol Brand, who read it from a horizontal position in the medical bay, and made a sound that was not quite laughter, but was in that general direction. The report's executive summary contained the following line: "Recommend immediate review of all Exivari cultural exchange materials compiled from text analysis, without direct human input, with particular attention to idiom interpretation and the sections titled Informal Recreational Language, Urban Animal Behavior References, and any content sourced from something called Porous Tens Comprehensive Index." It also contained the line, "The meeting was productive. The ambassador is perceptive, thorough, and genuinely interested in accuracy. She is also based on informal observation, funnier than the diplomatic briefing material suggested." That last line was edited out by Carol Brand before the report went up the chain of command, but Dale kept a copy. On the Scifi diplomatic vessel, Vial Shin filed her own report. It was 40 pages long. It contained detailed notes on 11 corrected idioms, 1 complete reclassification of the informal American English animal behavior category, 7 observations about human nonverbal communication, and 3 pages on what she described as the human relationship with purposeless difficulty, illustrated primarily by a pomegranate. It also contained a section she had not planned to write. She wrote it anyway. The section was titled Observations on Dale Corey, Crew Chief, Engineering, Serving as Emergency Diplomatic Liaison. It read, "The subject demonstrates an unusual combination of practical directness and cultural self-awareness. He does not perform confidence. He does not apologize for uncertainty. He corrects errors with clarity and without judgment." He laughed once during our session, at a moment of genuine recognition, and it was completely unguarded. She paused. She added, "I have met 17 human beings during the preparation period for this mission. Most of them were polished. Most of them were composed. Most of them were trying to present something." She paused again. She wrote, "He was not presenting anything." She looked at what she had written. She added one more line. "This is, in my assessment, rare." She filed the report. She closed her booklet. She looked out the window of her vessel at the orbital station, rotating in the dark. She thought about the pomegranate, about the way Dale had not told her she was doing it wrong when she turned it into a pattern, about the way he had said, "There is no intended." That is the point. She thought about 11 months of preparation and one afternoon that had dismantled and rebuilt more of her understanding of this species than all the months before it combined. She opened her booklet again. She turned to the informal American English section. She started a new list. At the top, she wrote, "Phrases to verify. Priority 1. She thought for a moment. She wrote the first entry, "Beating around the bush." She wrote next to it, "Do not assume. Ask Dale." She turned to a new page. She wrote at the top, "Second session request. Focus, human humor, informal social interaction, direct conversation without prepared materials." She thought about what her research team would say about that proposal. She thought about the 40 pages of notes she was filing. She thought about the symposium proceedings, which had been published, which 4,000 people had read, which contained the Doggy style entry under animal mimicry with full academic citations. She picked up her communication device. She sent a message to her research coordinator back home. It said, "Recall the symposium proceedings. All copies if possible. I will explain when I return. Also recall Porus 10's index from active circulation. Flag everything under informal recreational language and animal behavior for immediate reevaluation." She set the device down. She thought for a moment. She sent a second message. It said, "Also, please find every diplomatic trainee who was given the informal American English module in the last 8 months and let them know that the animal mimicry section contains significant errors. Do this before any of them have a conversation with a human being. This is urgent." She looked at the window again. The station rotated. Small lights moved along its structure, crew members going about their shifts, living their purposeless and complicated and fascinating lives. Dale Corey was in there somewhere, writing his 11-page report, drinking his 4th cup of coffee, being completely unpolished and completely genuine and, in her assessment, the most useful thing that had happened to Xivari human relations since first contact. She opened her booklet one more time. She wrote, in Xivari, in the inside cover where she kept things that mattered, "The most dangerous assumption is the one that feels like research." She closed the booklet. She looked out at the station. She thought, second session. Soon. She thought, bring more coffee. His supply appears insufficient. She thought, this species is going to take a very long time to understand. She thought, good. On the station, Dale Corey finished his report. He sent it. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the afternoon. About 11 entries crossed out with one careful line each. About 4,000 Xivari scholars, plus about the pomegranate seeds arranged in a pattern on a cloth. His comm unit pinged. It was a message from Vielle Shin, routed through the official diplomatic channel. Typed in English, clean and precise. It said, I have a revised list of phrases requiring clarification. It is extensive. I would like to schedule a second session at your earliest convenience. I will bring my own beverage. Please ensure adequate coffee supply. Dale read it. He read it again. He thought about Carol Brand in the medical bay. He thought about the 3-star translation app. He thought about how he had been handed this job with 0 preparation and 14 words of Xivari. And somehow it had been, by any reasonable measure, the most interesting afternoon of his career. He typed back, I am available tomorrow. Same room. I will bring the pomegranate. He sent it. 3 seconds later, her response arrived. It said, perfect. Also, I have questions about the phrase Netflix and chill. Our index filed it under human recreational technology habits. I suspect this may require revision. Dale stared at the screen. He thought about Carol Brand. He typed, it definitely requires revision. He thought for a moment. He typed, we are going to be doing this for a while, aren't we? Her response took 6 seconds. It said, yes, I believe we are. This appears to be inevitable. Then, A pause. Then one more line. It said, I do not object to this. Dale smiled. Outside the window, the stars did not move, because stars do not move on a human timescale. But the station turned in its slow rotation, and somewhere in the dark, Vielle Shin's vessel held its position, and the space between them was not, Dale thought, as wide as it had been this morning. He sent one last message. It said, "Neither do I." He turned off his comm unit. He went to find more coffee. End.